So much of the current debate has focused on the issue of establishing the employment relationship and whether or not certain types of relationship between platforms and the people who perform services on these platforms constitute employment or an outsourcing to an independent contractor or a freelancer. In light of the quest for decent standards of work, has this debate to a certain extent skewed the fact that all work should be decent work, regardless of whether or not there's some standards of decent working conditions should apply to all workers, regardless of the employment relationship being established or not?
You're very right in raising this point, because there are a number of decent work elements that are actually applicable to all workers, including that of the platform workers, irrespective of the contractual status. The first is the core conventions, that is the fundamental principles and rights at work. So along with the four conventions, we have the fifth one, which is the occupational safety and health, which is applicable to all of them. The second set that you can identify is the labor standards, which are there in a number of other ILO instruments of general application. So this involves, social security or access to labor inspection, which you can again apply to these platform workers. And then there are other labor standards, which are there in ILO instruments, which could be very relevant to platform work, whether it is in terms of fair termination or the kind of payment systems that can be applied to them, or access to data and privacy, or access to dispute resolution. So, you have all of these that are there, which are applicable to platform workers irrespective of contractual status. So there's quite a bit that is there. But where it does become very difficult to start seeing which law applies where is within the online labor platforms, because platform workers are across multiple jurisdictions, and then you have a client who is in a completely different location, and you have the platform which is based in another jurisdiction. So how do you actually go about applying many of these laws? That becomes a big question. But very clearly, as you very rightly said, there are a number of decent work elements which are there already in many labor standards, which are applicable to platform workers.
Not many understand the global nature of platform work and the interdependency of workers in the global south performing tasks for being matched to demand in the global north, and what this does beyond the sort of labor market consideration. What's the potential of the platform economy to contribute towards the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals, and why they should be receiving even more attention, perhaps, than has been the case to date?
Absolutely. I think nobody has made this connection between platform work and SDGs. And very clearly, the kind of trend that we see with the platform work increasing, especially in developing countries, and the kind of insecurities that are coming in, and the more of informalization that is happening to the labor markets, I think achieving SDG indicators is going to be even more difficult. I think it's going to be a big setback. And I think this is much more the reason why we should be looking at it. And I think the developing country governments should stop looking at platform work as a new mantra of creating employment generation, and rather really start questioning, what is this work and how is it being done, and what are the impacts on our societies and our development process? And I think that perspective also needs to change. And I think we haven't arrived there. It hasn't hit the governments because this link with SDGs has not yet been made. And I'm sure that in the coming years, when this is made, there would be a realization, what's been happening. And I think it would be then time for them to probably start looking at the regulations much more seriously.
It's often said that platform work is one of its benefits is the fact that it cushions against instabilities in regular employment, etc. So that people use it as kind of to top up their income or to kind of cushion the blow of redundancies in sunset industries when jobs are few and far behind. But I'm just wondering, is there actually any research out there that you might be aware of which has looked into the what happens in practice? Are people getting trapped in platform work? So there's many people, it's even accessible to migrant workers, etc. So many people use it as a kind of support mechanism to top up their income and supplement their other activities, etc., etc. But I'm just wondering, at the end, has the sector been mature enough to perhaps allow research into the ability of people to go back into regular employment after these periods of whatever, precarious circumstances which have caused them to be on the lookout for opportunistic work?
Yeah, I think your question has two parts, and I'm going to give a response in a different way at trying to address it. The first is the minute we say that, platform work allows people to supplement income, the minute we say that, that speaks volumes about the kind of labor market we are in, right? It's a labor market where there is a lot of precarious workers. There's a lot of insecurity of work. So that means that we need to really look at our job creation policies, our employment policies at the national government to see what needs to be done that workers are not precarious and they do not need to get the supplementary income through these other means. Because if you had reliable, continuous, regular work with good incomes, you wouldn't want to do any of this, right? You would be quite it should be sufficient for you to run your household. The very fact that you do not have that pushes many of them to these kinds of different types of work. Platform work is just one of them that has come up, but many of them do multiple jobs in different sectors to actually try to have an income which helps them to sustain their households. The second thing that I'd like to say is that from our own research, what we have seen that roughly about 40% of the workers would say that, especially on the online labor platforms, that it's the main source of income. So it's no longer, something that is a kind of a temporary or a stepping stone or anything. While if you're talking about location-based platforms, it's close to almost 100%, depending upon the country, that this is a main source of income. Because if you're a taxi driver, you're a taxi driver. It's just different that I'm not a self-employed, but I have a platform which determines, how I go about doing the work. For many of these workers, one of the struggles that they do have who work, especially on the online, on a regular basis, is that when they want to get out into the traditional labor market, they really struggle in trying to actually translate that the work they do on the online into their CVs. And many of them actually express that in the qualitative surveys to us, saying that, how do we actually write what we do? It's very difficult to even translate. And as this work is not really recognized in the traditional labor market, it does not really help them to get the jobs. So many of them just continue doing that. And after a period of time, there's a saturation in the income that you earn, because it doesn't mean that, your capacity to search for good jobs improves. It does not really improve. So there is a sort of a dead end for many of the workers.
Thank you so much. Again,